I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call.
Cry babies. Cry babies.
I'm not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now.
I can't give a guarantee of the future, especially when things are going the way they are.
Subtext.
Especially if things are going the way they are, there will be a revolution in this country, I can tell you now.
And you went on to say, you must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because killing is part of the revolutionary act.
Absolutely.
This was last year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can't say you are a revolutionary and then be scared to kill. But once you go killing people around, you are a terrorist. When you've got the support of the majority of your people to engage in war, and the majority of the people are with you, that is the revolution. It's not terrorism. And therefore, I'm not a terrorist. That's why I'm saying, at least for now, the conditions have not dictated that there should be anyone who should go to the bush and engage in war to kill. But if those conditions necessitate, will without hesitation do that. The same way the generations before us, when conditions necessitated, they were not scared to take up guns and shoot to kill.
Shoot to kill. Gamaza. Kill the poor. The farmer. Kill the poor. The farmer. Brr, pa. Pa. Brr, pa. Pa. Attention.
There are some disturbing parallels between the ideological extremism on display in South Africa and the extremism we see here in the United States. And if you are interested in pushing back against the far left and the far right, you need to understand what is happening as we speak in South Africa. The man in those clips is Julius Malema, the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, a Marxist-Leninist political party that is rapidly gaining support amongst South Africans.
We owe our liberation to the selflessness, internationalism of the Cubans, and the EFF is one of the products of the Marxist-Leninist revolution.
The Marxist framework is the first and most obvious through line between what's happening in South Africa and in the United States, as people who are familiar with the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement can attest.
I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Because these individuals share the same ideological framework, much of the rhetoric they use is going to be the same. If you're familiar with critical race theorists like Robin DiAngelo or Kimberly Crenshaw, you'll recognize the same rhetoric used by left-wing South Africans.
We are not supposed to be frightened by white fragility. This is our heritage. This music. We are not going to massage your feelings. We are not going to massage your white fragility, your white privilege.
They will have to work themselves out of privilege, because equality threatens privilege. They are scared that privilege is going away. That's why they hate me for that. They hate everyone who wants to liberate the mind of black people.
These individuals also borrow from the postmodernist playbook, which is a particularly creepy form of gaslighting that centers around the explicit denial of the obvious meaning of words and instead hiding behind interpretation and vague references to systems instead of individuals.
And we've emphatically and repeatedly said the Boers and the farmers do not refer to individuals, but refer to a system of oppression.
Now, you testified earlier that Boer means farmer, is that correct?
Yes.
So would it be kill the farmer?
No. In a literal meaning, that's your interpretation. In our understanding, because we are not barbaric, we know that farmer gets to be used as a phase of land dispossession and the system that has rejected us and stolen property from us. That's what we mean by the farmer.
So chanting, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, doesn't really mean kill the Boer or kill the farmer. In the same way that chanting all cops are bastards doesn't really mean every individual cop is a bastard. In the same way that advocating for abolishing the police doesn't really mean we want to abolish the police. And of course, these same people will then turn around and say, Make America Great Again is a white supremacist dog whistle, along with calling for law and order in the middle of violent riots. It's not really addressing violence, it's about oppressing black people. Now at this point, I've been mostly criticizing Malema and those who share his ideological viewpoint, and rightfully so, but why are so many people drawn to Malema's worldview in the first place? Well, the obvious starting point is that South Africa is still reeling from the effects of apartheid. And for those who don't know, however bad racial discrimination was in the United States, South Africa's was at least as bad, if not worse, and took 30 years longer to end. And today, South Africa's economy is currently in shambles, with 33% unemployment, and literally the worst economic inequality in the world. So if you are capable of extending empathy to someone like Julius Malema, which you should be if you are even remotely serious about trying to address ideological extremism, it doesn't become that difficult to understand where him and others like him are coming from.
Thousands of children have seen their mothers being tortured. I was young when police walked into my mother's house and she was sleeping. They took off her blankets off. Man, I live with that for the rest of my life. That some strange man came into my house and took off the blankets of my mother to search if she's not a terrorist. We are still a traumatized nation, if you don't know. And that trauma is real. And don't push us to that pain. Because when that day comes, we'll not be scared.
And here is perhaps the most important part of this video. Listen carefully to what Imran Garda has to say to Julius Malema.
Talking to EFF supporters, it's very rare for me to come across supporters who are ideological. A lot of them essentially say, the ANC let us down, we're going to give the EFF a chance. They're not necessarily talking to me about Marxist revolution. They're not talking concepts. They're saying, we were let down and there's a gap and we want to give the EFF a chance.
Most of the supporters of the EFF are not ideologically possessed Marxist revolutionaries. They just have legitimate grievances that are not being addressed by the current political system. And that's the key point. Despite this obscene rhetoric, there are valid reasons why average people would support someone like Malema. And if you refuse to acknowledge these reasons, you're being willfully blind. Apply this same line of thinking to the United States, where obviously the situation for most people is not nearly as dire as in South Africa. But for many, there are still plenty of reasons to be dismayed with our current economic and political systems that continue to churn out disenfranchised and dispossessed people, particularly when it comes to young men. So if you're serious about addressing left-wing ideological extremism, then you should be actively seeking to address their legitimate concerns. Most notably, the obvious failures of capitalism and the wealth inequality and relative poverty that is plaguing our societies.
The relationship between income inequality and male homicide is like 0.75. It just covers all of it, which is to say that everywhere that everyone's poor, there's no male homicide. And everywhere that everyone's rich, there's no male homicide. But places where there's poor people and rich people, the male homicide rate goes way the hell up. And so it's unbelievably powerful relationship. That's a useful thing to keep squirreled away in your imagination. Poverty does not cause crime. Relative poverty causes crime. That is a completely different thing.
And just as it's important to address ideological extremism on the left, it's also necessary to address the ideological extremism on the right. And you do it in the same way. If you agree that Michael Knowles saying we need to eradicate transgenderism is as intellectually cowardly as Ta-Nehisi Coates saying we need to eradicate whiteness, then you should be trying to understand why there are so many people sympathizing with either person. With Knowles supporters, it's probably because of all the incredibly weird shit having to do with adults exposing themselves around children and doctors performing irreversible surgeries on confused kids. And with Coates supporters, it's probably because of the enduring economic inequality between black and white Americans continuing to be as bad as it is. This is the point I'm trying to make. The line through good and evil runs through every person's heart, which means the best way to push back against ideological extremism is to understand the real reasons why people adopt those extreme views to begin with. Only then can you act in a manner that speaks to and calls forth the reasonable part of the person whom you disagree with.
I always say the call for white people to be driven to the sea is so stupid, like a call a person will make one day that we must cut all the trees in South Africa. How is this country going to look like without trees? White people have naturalized here. They live with us. We now marry each other. We go to the same churches. We work together. We shop together. Our children now go to schools together, those of us who can afford, right? So why would we call for the slaughtering of such people? We are not calling for the slaughtering of white people. We are fundamentally disagreeing with white people on how we are going to redistribute the land in South Africa to create an equal society.
I don't know what's going to happen in South Africa, but I do know that the tensions and polarization here in the United States needs to be addressed. And there is no better way to do that than with understanding and empathy and common sense. And so, until next time, good luck and Godspeed.